All right, so let me start off with pastor and writer A.J. Swabda. He writes this. It dawned on me that were I to cheat on my wife, I would lose my job. If I stole from the church, I would be run out of town. If I lied about the church finances, I would be in big trouble. If I worshiped another god, I'd be removed. There are 9 commandments that if I chose to break, I might lose my ministry over. But if I did not keep a Sabbath day, I would probably get a raise. We have forgotten we have 10 commandments. Again, for the person that says we no longer need to rest, I'd be curious which of the other commandments they think are antiquated. Is the commandment against murder to be done away with? May we finally lie? Is adultery okay now? Is stealing okay now? And here's the stinger. We have basically changed a commandment into a suggestion. How's that for a beginning as we talk about Sabbath? If you're new here, we've been going through this series called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. And this is kind of actually a series within a series in terms of last week and this morning. If you're in our life groups and you're following along with Scazzero's book, you'll know that he has a chapter where he talks about 2 tools that, in his own words, allow us to breathe the air of eternity. And I love that phrase. And so last Sunday, we looked at fixed hour prayer. If you missed it, it's on the website. Go check it out. But kind of the part B of this is Sabbath. And so both of these tools, both of these practices, tradition calls them spiritual disciplines. They are a way for us to slow down, to follow Jesus well. And so last week was prayer. This week is the Sabbath. And I have to say a couple things this morning about this. One, I'm very, very, very passionate about this topic. And I actually find it very fascinating. But also, on the other hand, this is something that I really struggle with. And so it is kind of an odd sermon for me in that I'm passionate about it. I think it's immensely important, as we'll talk about, but then honestly, I struggle with it. So as we'll see, I have like a type A personality, go. And so for me to stop for 24 hours once a week, and we'll break that down, is tough. And so I do not speak this morning as someone who has mastered this. In fact, I would probably be there on the bottom. And so I also have that to say, to be honest. This is not something that I have mastered, that I'm saying, hey, look at me. That is not what I'm saying. I am preaching to myself this morning. But here's what I do think. Practicing Sabbath is one of the most countercultural practices that you can do today in our Western work-obsessed, efficiency-driven culture. Mary Bell wrote this, and here, how's this for a line? Achievement is the alcohol of our time. AJ, who I quoted there, he's written a fantastic book on the Sabbath. He says this: we have become the most emotionally exhausted, psychologically overworked, spiritually malnourished people in history. And I would agree with him. And so if you're anything like me, I grew up in the church, but honestly, I literally don't think I can remember a sermon on the Sabbath. And not only did I did not hear it talked about, but for me growing up, I kind of thought of it as like this old legalistic ritual, meaning this. I thought, hey, Sabbath, that's like something in like the 1950s. Don't take this offensively. It's kind of like Amish people in the Midwest, right? Where like the whole like town is shut down. You can't see a movie. You can't watch football on TV. You can't play cards. And all Sabbath is don't do anything. Right? And who wants that? Like, if that's Sabbath, that's weird, and I'll just leave it at that. That's what I grew up with thinking about Sabbath. So, as we always do, and is what is most important, let's go back to the scriptures, and let's see what God has to say about the Sabbath. We're going to be in 3 passages this morning. First one is going to be Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. Genesis, the book of beginnings. This is the 2nd chapter in the whole Bible. This is like the very beginning. We read these 3 verses. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. So God just got done, no big deal, just creating the world. By the 7th day, God had finished the work that he had been doing. And so on the 7th day, he rested from all his work. And then God blessed the 7th day, and he made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. Now, 6 days, and don't get caught up in whether those are literal or metaphorical. I don't think that's the point of this chapter. The point is that God created the whole world. I mean, I think you could say that God probably had a pretty productive work week, right? I mean, sometimes kind of that we were like, man, I did a lot. I don't think anybody can say, hey, at the end of the week, I just created the world. No big deal. What does God do at the end? He rests. So a couple things. Is God tired? No. Is he weak? Okay. So usually when people rest, I mean, they're tired or they're weak or they're lazy. I think we probably all get. I don't think God's lazy either. But he stops and rests. It's so interesting to me. I think we just glance over that. But a couple quick points from this text. One, God is not a workaholic. Isn't that interesting? God is not a workaholic. And I think we know that, but to say that, I think is something else, because I think a lot of us are that. So here's what God does. He creates the world, he stops, and he doesn't just stop. It's not like he's just like, oh, let me just stop and that's it. But he stops to do something. He stops to rest and to kind of delight in and to look at everything that he's made. Let me give you an example. It's a cheesy one. It's not going to do justice. But I remember growing up for me, and one of the things I did, one of my main chores, my main way of working was lawn work. Okay? So every Saturday, at least during the summer, not during the winter, but I would mow the front yard, I would mow the backyard. I get all the weeds out. I would use the weed eater. I was scared of it at first, but then I thought, hey, this actually works easier than my hands. And so I would do all that stuff. I would sweat. There's like gnats around my ankles and my arms. I grew up in Riverside. It's like 105 during the summer. And you know what I would do? I would stop when I was all done. I would go to in front of our front lawn on the street, and I would just kind of like look at it and honestly just kind of bask in its glory. Guys, you get what I'm saying? All the lines were like straight. You know what I mean? Like, it's all about the pattern that you can develop with your lawnmower. The sidewalks, I mean, I had swept or hosed off all weeds or flowers or snails or whatever was on there, and the sidewalks were just completely clean and fresh. And it's not that I would just stop, but I stopped, and then I looked at it, and I rested, and I delighted in the work that I had just done. I think in some ways, in a far more lower, smaller way, that's a little bit of a picture of kind of what God does here. The word rested in Genesis 2 is Shabbat. Shabbat. And as you can maybe guess, that's where we get the word Sabbath from. Is the Hebrew word Shabbat, which is translated rested. Here's what that word means literally. It means to stop. It means to seize. And if you take it even further, some translators will say, hey, it actually gets at this idea of to be complete, or actually to celebrate. And so the picture here is not just of God not working, but it's him stopping to rest and to worship. And this is an important point. There's a difference between not working and actually being refueled and worshiping. Here's what not working is. Not working is like laying on your couch the whole day or binge watching Netflix or whatever. That's not working. But honestly, I think if we're all honest, those things don't necessarily refuel you. Best example of this, this kind of sounds like a weird thing to say, but learn how to vacation. The first couple of vacations Rachel and I took, we would go somewhere and see everything and go everywhere, and we found out that that actually doesn't refuel us. We've just actually gotten more busy, and we would come back not rested. So even if you're not working, the question is, are you proactively engaging in the goodness of God and his good world? I think for many of us today, even when we take days off physically, emotionally, and spiritually, we are still engaging in work. I want to highlight two key words in this passage: blessed and holy. Blessed and holy. To bless something is to give life to something. It's to bring vitality, to make more life. The key point is this: God blessed the Sabbath. The Sabbath is a day for us to be refueled, to be re-energized, to bring life to us. That's what it means for the Sabbath to be blessed. Related, the word holy. All holy means literally is set apart. So God's saying, hey, I've set apart a day to be unique, to be different, to be special, for it to be dedicated to him. So again, Sabbath isn't just a day off, and if you're like me in my college days where you could sleep in till 1 p.m. It's stopping, but then it's also resting and dedicating and setting apart a time for God. Now, here's what's interesting to me. I grew up, and I think Christians think that the climax of the creation story happens on the sixth day. Right? What happens on the sixth day is that we're made. Humans are made, and they're declared to be made in the image of God. And I always thought that was kind of like the climax, like the mountain point of the creation story. And it's actually not. Day 7 is. When God declares there to be a Sabbath, Day 7 is like the height, it's the climax of the creation story. All 6 days are going towards this moment. There's a Jewish theologian, he says this: Sabbath is a bride, and its celebration is like a wedding. Sabbath is a bride, and its celebration is like a wedding, meaning this: if you took a bride and a groom and a whole wedding party and you put them at a venue, right? And there's expensive flowers everywhere. There's like expensive cake. There's champagne. I mean, there's so much stuff that's gone into this, and let's not forget the candy bar. But then imagine this if there was no wedding ceremony. It'd be weird, right? If like everything's there, everything's set up, all this time has gone into it, but then the climax, the highlight of why everyone's there, the wedding ceremony and the reception where the awkward dance moves happen, if that doesn't happen, there's no point. That's what Sabbath is to us. We are moving towards it. It is the point of the preceding 6 days. So here's kind of point number 1 this morning, all this to say, every single one of us in here, you were designed to Sabbath. It is actually a part of creation. Like part of this world and the way it functions is that you work, but then you rest. And to be clear, I think some of us do need to hear, hey, yeah, work is a good thing. There's nothing wrong with work. Work existed before sin. Work is not sinful. So we need to work. Tim Keller says this: work is not all there is to life, though. You will not have a meaningful life without work, but you cannot say that your work is the meaning of your life. Just as we were made to work, you were made and designed to rest. Just as God works, so we should work. We're made in His image. And just as God rests, so should we rest. God invites us to both work and rest. And so resting has nothing to do with a sign of weakness. It has nothing to do with like, oh, you're not good enough, or you can't get things done, you're not productive, you're not efficient, so you need to rest. No. God says it's actually a good thing to rest. Not only is it a good thing, but I'm actually, as we're going to find out, command you to rest. Now, the awkward thing is, this sounds like really good news, right? Like, I don't think anybody's going to be like, man, I was so frustrated that Mark talked about us resting. Right? That's not going to happen. Here's the weird thing then. Why don't we do it? I mean, you look at American culture, and I think it's very fair to say we don't Sabbath. So what does that look like when we don't Sabbath? I think it looks like this: being full of anxiety, always tense and kind of constantly on edge. People are stressed out. We're over-caffeinated. We're burned out. We're depressed. We're in superficial relationships that don't go anywhere. That is America right now. I read this past week. Americans take the shortest paid vacations of anyone in the world. Isn't that interesting? Americans take the shortest paid vacations in the world, and I don't think that vacationing necessarily means resting, by the way, but that's something to chew on. We don't Sabbath well. That's what I'm getting at. And so I don't think it's by accident that God has actually put into His story a command that says that we need to. So let's get to that. We're going to look at two more passages. The second one comes in the book of Exodus. We'll put it up on the screen. Context is this. Moses is receiving the 10 Commandments from God, right? Most of us know a little bit about this. We're going to hop into the middle of this. Verse 8. God gives Moses the Sabbath command, and here's how it reads. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. There's that word. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male or female servant, not your animal, nor any foreigners residing in your towns. And here's the point. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but He rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Out of all the famous 10 commandments, guess which one takes up the most space, the most real estate? Yes, okay, we're tracking, that's good. Yeah, the Sabbath. So is it don't murder? Does don't murder take up the most space? No. It's not don't divorce or don't lie or don't steal. All those things matter, right? But isn't it interesting that the biggest, so to speak, commandment is honor the Sabbath. And there's the exact same logic here, which is this. God worked for 6 days and He rested, so you should do the same thing. You were designed to rest. Now, here's the point behind it. And this is where it gets tough. This is not just some arbitrary law. The point behind Sabbath rest is that I think it's God's way of allowing us to rest in the fact that He is in control and rules the world. To practice Sabbath really means this, that you know ultimately that you're not the one that keeps the world running. Right? Ultimately, you're not the one who provides for your family. Ultimately, you're not the one who keeps your work projects moving forward. Alarming news for Americans. The world can go on without you for one day. No, but seriously. Like, the world isn't going to fall apart. It's not going to come crumbling down if for 24 hours you stop. Like, your family, your neighborhood, your job, all the things that you're wrapped in, that you're so important in, they're not going to come crashing down if you take a break for 24 hours. The Sabbath reminds us that we are not God. It reminds us that He's God, He's the creator, and we're the creation. And that is actually a really good thing. So my first question for you this morning is this: do you trust in that? Can you rest in that? Part of my problem with Sabbathing is I actually don't really deep down inside believe, you know what? If I don't check emails or if I don't do anything for 24 hours, everything's going to be just fine. Sabbath comes down to a trust issue. Do you really believe that God is in control and that God's running the world and He'll do just fine if you unplug for 24 hours? One more passage. Deuteronomy, a couple of books later after Genesis. Deuteronomy chapter 5. We're just going to read one verse. Hang with me here. Deuteronomy 5:15. Here's the context. Exodus. We just read, Israel had just gotten freed from slavery in Egypt. Right? They were enslaved to Pharaoh for hundreds of years, and God sets them free, and He gives them the 10 Commandments. But God's really smart, obviously. That's an understatement. He knows that, hey, generations are going to pass, and the second generation that shows up in the Israelites, they're not going to remember the 10 Commandments. They're going to get distracted. They're going to be tempted by other things. And so God kind of rehearses the 10 Commandments again for this new generation that emerges. And what sticks out is this. He gives the same commandments, and the first half of the Sabbath command doesn't change. It's just like the first version in Exodus. What's interesting, though, is that the second half of it, He offers a different perspective. He changes the second half. He gives a different story as to why they should practice the Sabbath. The first reason that God gave in Exodus was, hey, you were designed for it. I did it, so you should do it. Here's the second reason. Deuteronomy 5:15. Remember that you were slaves. That's the key word. You were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. Here in Deuteronomy 5, here's what God does. He portrays the Sabbath day as a reenactment of freedom. Israel, you are no longer enslaved. Practice a Sabbath. What God is doing is He's reminding Israel, hey, you used to be enslaved to Egypt, to Pharaoh. I've set you free. Israel, you are no longer just kind of like a brick production system that's just there to build houses for Egypt. That's not you anymore because I've set you free. And He's saying because of that, you can take a day of rest. Now let's move forward here to 2019. I think a lot of us here are quite busy. Like, remember the concept of a 40-hour work week? That doesn't exist anymore. I mean, statistics show that most people now are working 50, 60, 70 hours a week. It used to be something that was just kind of, okay, just doctors or attorneys. No, that's actually more like standard now. We are busier than ever before. Check this out. Social theorists in the 1930s, here's what they predicted about the American economy. They said, hey, with the advent of technology, there's actually going to come a point here, maybe in a couple of decades, where everyone's going to be able to work part-time. You're actually going to spend more time with your family, with your friends, because there's going to be so much greater technology. That's going to do the work for us, and we can kind of just back off a little bit. That is what social theorists predicted in the 1930s. What's happened? Actually, the exact opposite. So things like an iPhone and email and cars have actually made us more busier than ever before in the history of the world. Why? You can check your email everywhere. I mean, so 8 to 5, Monday through Friday? No, it's Saturday morning, Sunday night. Do you just have to do your work in an office cubicle? No. You can work anywhere now. I mean, honestly, so like I was out of the country a couple weeks ago. There was a very real temptation for me to check my email while I was in London. You couldn't do that 20 years ago. So it's interesting. Technology has actually had the opposite effect on us. We no longer take breaks. And the sad thing is this. I think we are addicted to being busy. And our iPhones are our new appendage. What's even worse is I think our culture brags about this. Let me ask you this. What do you think of people who are really busy, who have full schedules? You probably think that they're in demand, successful, and everybody needs them. We've actually assigned value and worth to people who are busy. It seems like to me, I ask a lot of people, hey, how you doing? I probably say 7 or 8 times out of 10, here's the answer that I hear. Oh, I'm doing good. I'm just so busy. And I give that answer sometimes. So I get it. I've yet to have someone say, hey, Johnny, how you doing? Oh, you know, Mark, I'm doing so good. I just have all this time available in my hands. I haven't heard that one yet. We're working more than ever before. We have more stuff than ever before, and yet we are more miserable than ever before. I think that's a diagnosis of Western American culture in the 21st century. Tim Keller in New York City puts it this way. For those of us in here, sitting here right now, and I'll put myself in this, if you find something like a Sabbath extremely hard to practice, it may mean this, and this is scary. It may mean that you're actually a slave. Remember Israel coming out of Egypt, and God says, hey, you're free now, practice the Sabbath. If Sabbath is hard for you, it may mean that you're a slave. Right? Whether it's from your own heart, whether it's from the organization you work for, your calling, your career, all the above, those things are going to abuse you if you don't have the ability to stop and to unplug for 24 hours once a week, which that is how I would define a Sabbath. 24 hours once a week. We'll get into what that looks like. But Sabbath, hear this loud and clear. Sabbath is a declaration of your freedom. Sabbath is a declaration of your freedom. Here's what it means. It means you're not a slave anymore. You're not a slave to your culture's expectations. You're not a slave to your family's hopes. You're not a slave to your school or your work's demands. You're not even a slave to your own insecurities. The Sabbath is a concrete symbol that God's saving grace is what frees you and not what you do. So the Sabbath is a regular time to stop striving, to stop reaching, to stop trying to justify yourself, like before God, before yourself, before others. And it's so that you can just stop and bask that you are completely accepted and loved by the King of the universe, regardless of what you do. The important thing, until you grasp this, until you actually speak this over yourself, you're going to feel guilty for resting, or you're not actually going to be able to unplug. AJ, again, his book on Sabbath is so good. Listen to this. The Sabbath teaches us that we do not work to please God. Rather, we rest because God is already pleased with the work that He has accomplished in us. Sabbath is a scheduled weekly reminder, this is good news, that we are not what we do. Rather, we are who we are loved by. Sabbath and the gospel, they scream the same thing. We do not work to get to a place where we finally get to breathe and rest. That actually is slavery. Rather, we rest and breathe and enjoy God that we might enter into that rest. So, this is the why of Sabbath. I can say some more. I think it's really important, though. What is behind Sabbath? What's the motivation? Two things. You're designed for it. You're made for it. It's part of creation. Secondly, Sabbath is a reminder that you are not a slave, that you are free. Your worth comes from what God says about you, not what you do. Okay, Mark, how do we do this? What does this look like practically? Let me just say this up front. I'm not going to answer everything. We could spend a whole series on Sabbath. At the Information Center, there's an FAQ sheet on a bunch of questions about the Sabbath. I would encourage you, go to it, read it over. If you're in our series, this comes straight from the book that we are reading from. I think it's very helpful notes. And let me start off saying a couple things. One, if you're going to Sabbath, which means for 24 hours once a week, stop and unplug, it is going to be hard. Not easy. I'm not going to try to act like it's easy. It's very hard. And it's very hard at first. But think about it. Anything of worth, anything of value in life is very hard to do. So don't let that stop you. The other thing is that there's no formula to Sabbath, meaning it's going to look different for all of us. The way I Sabbath is going to look different than the way that Tom does. Here's an example. For me, Sunday is a work day. I can't Sabbath on a Sunday. So that means I need to find another 24-hour block somewhere in my schedule. Now, there are others of you probably just like that. Maybe you work in the restaurant industry, and so you work on Sunday nights. Maybe you're a doctor, right? You're in the office Sunday afternoons or whatever it is. So there are those of us in here whose Sundays can't be a Sabbath for you. Now, I would say that I think for most people, I think Sundays are probably the best day to Sabbath because of usually how our work weeks work out. But let me just say this. It doesn't matter what day of the week. So we don't need to be legalistic about that as much as it's about, can you stop and unplug for 24 hours sometime throughout your week? The other thing about Sabbath is that you have to plan for it. Think of Sabbath as like a weekly holiday. Now, hopefully those are fun and not stressful. But take, for example, we have Thanksgiving and Christmas coming up. Are any of you going to wake up on Thanksgiving morning or wake up on Christmas morning and then schedule your day and make all your plans? Does anybody do that? Okay, I thought there would be at least one. Okay, thank you, Don. We don't do that. So why would you do that with Sabbath? You have to plan ahead. You have to be intentional. So here's what I do. So for Rachel and I, Mondays are when we try to Sabbath, right? Because we can't do it on Sundays. And so here's what this looks like in our schedule. It means that throughout the week at night or on Saturdays, that's when we're grocery shopping. That's when we're paying the bills. That's when we're cleaning the house, doctor's appointments, whatever, all that kind of stuff. We do those on Saturdays or at night throughout the week or whenever. But we get those done ahead of time so that when we come to Monday, Monday is a day that's not full of chores and emails. Maybe some of you have emailed me on Mondays. I actually put up an auto reply that honestly says, hey, as a part of emotionally healthy leadership, I Sabbath on Mondays. So you have to schedule, you have to plan ahead in order to make Sabbath work. It is worth it. It's hard, it takes work. It takes work to Sabbath well, but it is worth it. Another part of this then is you have to think through what is work for you. Because that's also different for all of us. Let me give an example. My wife, Rachel loves to run. So Rachel, for her to run on a Sabbath, that's great. It brings her delight. It brings her joy. Don't say amen yet, Wade. Because here's my point. Running is worse than work for me. Okay? There's no way in the world I should run on my Sabbath. No, I'm actually being serious. Running is not enjoyable for me. I don't understand how my wife finds it enjoyable and other people. So for Rachel, does it make sense for her to run on a Monday? Absolutely. Does it make sense for me to run on a Monday? Absolutely not. So one of the things you have to ask yourself is, okay, what activities are refueling for you? What are your passions that honestly, they actually allow you to re-energize and to fuel yourself? Do those on the Sabbath. The Sabbath is a day, not only for you to stop, not only to rest, but to delight in God's presence. And if that's through running, God bless you. Other things. I'm just giving you guys examples. If you're not a morning person, don't wake up early on your Sabbath. Sleep in. Any amens, hallelujahs to that? You guys get what I'm saying here? Let me give you a couple more. If you're married, and I'm going to say this, and I highlight, if you're married. I don't want any emails. Make love on your Sabbath. I won't say anymore. Eat a great tasty meal. Honestly, have a meal with your family. Have a glass of wine or Martinelli's or whatever you do. Don't worry about the calorie count. Now, you got to make sure that you're eating healthy throughout the other 6 days of the week, right? But the point is, on your Sabbath, rest and take joy and delight in the good gifts that God has been given us. Here's probably the hardest practice for most people to do on their Sabbath, and it would be mine. Turn this off. Oh. And your computer. Now, the minute I say that, some of you, type A people, more. We can't turn our iPhone off. Do you know all the things that I get? Mark, what about emergencies? Couple things, two things. One, 15 years ago, you didn't have a problem with this. What happened 15 years ago? Huh? People died. Well, unfortunately, not to sound sad, people still do die. So anyways, that's a bummer. That's why we believe in Jesus and the resurrection. All right, but 15 years ago, you did have this problem, so you can get through it. And secondly, part of planning and being intentional with Sabbath is that those people around you, your best friends, your family, people who would contact you, should know that you're Sabbathing. They should know when you're Sabbathing, so that if there is a life and death emergency, not if your sport team lost, or if there's a life and death emergency, honestly, they know how to contact you and get a hold of you. So yeah, I Sabbath on Mondays, and I'll try to turn my phone off. If someone really needs to contact me, they still can. They know where I live and all that kind of stuff. So I just kind of want to, let's just take that excuse and just kind of put it right over there, because it is an excuse, and I'm speaking to myself. And I have to say, there's nothing wrong with an iPhone. There's nothing wrong with technology. It is a beautiful thing, but are we slaves to it? Last thing, the Sabbath isn't just a day for rest. It's not just a day off. It's a day for worship. So the scriptures say, Sabbath to the Lord your God. So Sabbath isn't just a day off. It's a day of worship. Eugene Peterson puts it this way. This is so good. He says, think of Sabbath as playing and praying. Playing and praying. Here's my question for you on this. Where is God in your Sabbath? Do you open up the scriptures? Do you have kids? What if you went through a chapter in the Bible together at the dinner table? What if you prayed together? If you're an outside person, go outside, go on a prayer walk. If you're an introvert, journal God's blessings in your life. If you're an extrovert, go and get a meal with someone and talk to them about your faith. Where is God in your Sabbath? Listen to worship music. Right? I mean, again, there's no formula. There's so many things that we can do with this. But the question is, are you delighting and pursuing God's presence on your Sabbath? That is the holy part. That is the set apart aspect of Sabbath. If I can invite the music team up at this point, here's what I want to end with. I want you to very seriously think about, reflect on, what is holding you back from Sabbathing? What's holding you back from taking 24 hours in your week to stop, rest, delight, and reflect on Jesus? Is it technology? Is it your need that, I need a busy schedule? What is holding you back? How can you take practical steps to start Sabbathing? If you've never done this before, start with just 12 hours. Can you just take 12 hours, block that out to Sabbath? After a couple weeks, a couple months, turn that into 24 hours. Let me pray for us. Holy Spirit, we ask that you would give us rest. We ask that we could find our value, our worth in you and who you say we are, and not what we do. May we prioritize you in our life because we just want more of you. I pray for your presence to flood the bridge. Make us aware of your Spirit. Amen.